Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Rising. Mr. Don Calloway, what is on the docket?
Talking taxing folks with the tariffs and counting folks with the census. Here with the Beard Gang, the Bro Show.
All that and more coming up today on Rising. Well, all right, Don, I'm going to talk about Trump's Mexican standoff, as I'm calling it today. Tariffs to stop illegals. Although I guess in a Mexican standoff, technically nobody wins unless somebody else comes in. Maybe that's the case here. The president's decided that a way to deal with the illegal immigration crisis is to institute a 5% tariff on imports from Mexico unless the Mexican government is willing to do more, not specifically known yet what exactly that would be, to tamp down on illegal immigration from Central American countries. These are not Mexican migrants making their way across. They're people from what is known as the Northern Triangle of Central America, predominantly, but not entirely. Could this put the trade deal at risk right now? People are concerned about what it will mean for the U.S., Canada, Mexico agreement. And then there's also concerns over whether this is prioritizing border security over the economy, and especially going into an election year, this could be something that has very real consequences for a whole bunch of folks, as well as consequences for the politicians, and in this case, President Trump himself, who have implemented this thing. Don, there is a crisis at the border. There's a need to fix it. I don't know if this is going to do it. I'm starting to worry that we're running out of options here.
Yeah, ultimately, I don't know what the president's goal is. What would he like to see these Central American, Latin American countries do to stop this, right? Like, how does, I get it. Everybody, the whole world should be on board here, all hands on deck, but what could possibly be the outcome?
We do have a Trump tweet, which will perhaps...
There's always a tweet.
That's right. On June 10th, the United States will impose a 5% tariff on all goods coming into our country from Mexico until such time as illegal migrants stop coming through Mexico and into our country. Stop. Just stop. Wow. I listened to his command. The tariff will gradually increase until the illegal immigration problem is remedied, at which time the tariffs will be removed. Details from the House to follow. The problem here, Don, there's a few things. I'm pretty interested in getting the border situation fixed. I do think it's a problem. I think there are loopholes. I think there's a lot of exploitation of the goodwill of the American people that's going on. That all said, currently, Mexican law does not make it illegal to cross from Mexico into the United States.
Sure.
So what you're going to have to do then, I guess, is have the Mexican government prevent anyone from Central America from crossing into Mexico.
Into Mexico, right. The El Salvadorians.
And I wonder what their capabilities are there, and also what their political will is to actually enforce that. So
probably none, and at the end of the day, who ends up paying for this is the American people. A tariff is a tax on goods. These are regressive taxes. They're going to hit lower income people the hardest, and it's more uncertainty for the business community.
I think the one thing Trump needs to make sure he takes good care of for the next 15 months or so is the economy, because he's in good shape going into re-election if the economy's strong. If things start to crap out because of China, because of Mexico tariffs, it's going to be a whole lot harder for re-election. But what is on your mind, Mr. Don Calloway?
Dr. Sexton, last time I was here, we talked about the census, and the Supreme Court case had just been argued at that time, and we have some really hard-hitting revelations today. It's the case of the located hard drives and some pretty serious revelations about the possible motives behind the citizenship question proposed on the United States Census by the Trump administration. After Republican operative Thomas Hoffler died, his computer hard drives were found. Those things forever. The hard drives uncovered a 2015 study which concluded that a census citizenship question could help with Republican-influenced gerrymandering. The citizenship question is now before the Supreme Court, and some high-profile opponents of the question have petitioned the court to consider this game-changing information. Now, the Supreme Court is an appeals court. Appeals courts try law, not underlying fact. But what makes this really interesting is the idea that new facts would or could have materially altered the outcome are now in play after oral arguments have already been heard. Now, perhaps this is not a novel legal issue, but it will be interesting to see what the Supreme Court does and procedurally, what they do with the case now in light of these revelations. These revelations completely undercut Secretary Wilbur Ross and the Department of Commerce's assertions throughout the life of this matter that the census question's purpose is to protect the Voting Rights Act. Now, here we have hard evidence from an insider who was the architect of the question, at least one of the architects of the question, that suggests that this is done exclusively for Republican political motives. Not only will the census question depress turnout, and participating in the census, but this revelation shows that ultimately there's a more nefarious potential use for the question at play: to gerrymander state and local districts by excluding non-citizens. The Constitution demands that each person living within the United States be counted. It does not demand what states can then do with that data. Any reasonable person can now expect that red states will very likely draw legislative districts and apportion crucial resources based upon a census that asks a citizenship claim.
You know, Don, both sides gerrymander, though. You know,
Absolutely.
Everyone always talks about gerrymander. Oh, the other guys who gerrymander.
Yeah.
It's like dark money. Everybody's taking dark money in politics.
Well,
what does dark money even mean?
There is a gerrymandering issue, but there's a couple of different issues at play here. We see the smoking gun. This is the proverbial Perry Mason, Matlock. This is it, right? We know now why Republicans did this, and it's not to protect the Voting Rights Act. It's not to ensure one man, one vote. It is to achieve political ends, and you just don't mess around with the constitutional obligations of the census like that.
Who is this guy? Like, well, he's the...
he was one of the guys who kind of gave this, it's not like he was a famous,
No, he's not famous.
Or even famous for D.C., but he was one of the guys who gave Bannon this idea about how they can achieve their new conservative world order, and they could do it via the census.
How did anyone get access to his hard drive?
His daughter found it.
Oh.
But he should have had that thing password encrypted, man.
Obviously. You don't want people to know what you've been looking at on your hard drive, especially after you pass. It can't be like, no, I was looking for something else.
Right. No, well, this
Very
came
important
out.
Safety tip.
Interesting legal question, though. We'll have to see what the Supreme Court does with this really legitimate evidence that's happened after oral arguments.
But as I think you pointed out in your monologue, they don't really look at the effects or even really the motives. They're just going to look at this as a function of,
you gotta look at
legal reality. And if this is a universally applicable law that does not have any constitutional snags in it, probably going to stay. So
it might stay, but I would argue that there are serious constitutional issues. Again, you can't, let's be literalists about this. The Constitution says we will count every person living within the United States, not citizens.
Yeah, but this doesn't count them. It just says, are you a citizen? It's just a question.
No, but you won't participate. Right?
Well, that's a choice that people are making.
So the question is, what emanates from the obligation to count? What can states do with what happens with the people that they actually count, right? So, we will see. It's a serious issue, though.
It is indeed a serious issue. Next on Rising. The U.S. has seen at least 8 tornadoes a day in 22 different states over the last 2 weeks.
And this highly active tornado season is not over yet. Storm chaser Quincy Vigil breaks down what's behind the spike in this year's number of tornadoes. That next, as Rising rolls on.